Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're working on a hanging sleeve today, so if you want to know how to make a hanging sleeve for a vintage quilt like this, please stay tuned. Here is the vintage quilt that I was telling you about in a previous Whip It Wednesday video. I thought it was a double wedding ring quilt, but it's actually a variation on the double wedding ring, and it's called the pickle dish quilt. I haven't looked up anything about the history of it, so I really, other than the name of the quilt, and I did look up some pictures of it, but I didn't worry about the history of it. And one of my subscribers, thank you Teresa, for pointing out that it is a pickle dish and not the double wedding ring. This is a really nice piece. I took a picture of the whole thing and I'll insert it here, but I'll just point out some highlights. There are some other pictures of close-ups of these blocks and of the ruffle. So I'll go over that just a little bit, and then we'll see what my plan of attack is to make the sleeve. So the pickle dish quilt, it's basically I guess this will be considered the block, like a circle is considered the block, and it's made of these little 4 outer rings, and then the centerpiece, and it all comes together. And these are each one of the little, I don't even know what to call it, arcs, is triangles that are stitched together with diamonds on the end. So you can see the triangles here, and then the diamonds on each end. This one also has hand piecing throughout, so the whole top is hand pieced, and then the ruffle is actually stitched on by machine. And what the quilter did is she stitched along the bottom little arc, and then there are 2 rows of stitching. I think I got a close-up of that on one of my pictures, but there are 2 rows of stitches here by machine for the ruffle. I think it's a really nice piece. You can tell that it's totally scrappy. The person who owns it, I think she said 1950s. That's when they believe it was made, but it doesn't have a label or anything on it. Let's see, if we look closely at the back, it doesn't have batting inside of it, so it's really more of a coverlet. It's not a quilt. It wouldn't be like for warmth or anything like that, so it might have been like a summer thing. And then there is a joining, there's a seam here on the back that's this closing, it's closed by hand, so I'm not sure how they I'm not sure how all of this was put together. The only thing I know is that I was asked to put a sleeve on the back. My plan of attack is that I'm going to use some fabric that I have right here. Okay, this is it was given to me, so I don't know. I think I remember where I got it from, but it's not, I didn't buy it. It was given to me, and so I'm going to use it as the sleeve on the back of this. It has already been washed. You can tell that it's been washed before, so I'm not going to rewash it. But I wouldn't, whatever I was going to put on the back of this, it would have to be washed. So this has already been washed. And the first thing that I'm going to do with it is give it a good press before I make some cuts in it. With this process, since it's already finished, I do have to do the entire sleeve by hand. There's going to be 1 or maybe 2 or 3 stitches done by machine, but most of it is going to be by hand because this is already finished. So let me give this a press, and then we'll talk about measurements and cutting and all that. So I have the piece pressed for my sleeve, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about my thought process is as I prepare to cut this fabric, I am going to put this sleeve, of course, on the back of the quilt, and I'm going to put it on the short side, okay, because it's a pretty big quilt. I mean, coverlet. It's pretty large. So I'm going to put it on the back side. One thing that I was thinking about is this ruffle, and if I was going to try to put the sleeve on the ruffle, and of course I'm not going to do that. And so it's probably going to be about here, and I'm not sure what that's going to do as far as how the ruffle hangs, if it'll fold over or anything. I have no idea, and I'm not going to make that my issue. The other part of it is that there is this section that's already been seamed on the back, and I have thought about putting the sleeve right on this part, but I think that it'll be lower than I want it to be if I do that. So I'm actually going to use the other end. And then there's part of this that's not stitched down all the way, like the thread has come out, and so I am going to go back and just hand stitch the parts that are open on that part, but the rest of it I'm just going to leave as is. It does have some stains on it, but I'm not going to wash this. To me, it seems to be pretty fragile, and so I'm not going to try to wash it at all. I've already measured the distance that I want to use for my sleeve, and it's going to be a 58-inch sleeve. I've already measured that using this quilt, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my piece here and I'm going to cut a pretty large rectangle. My goal is to get a 58.5-inch strip that I'm going to cut down to either 8 inches or 8.5 inches. If I do 8.5 inches, then I get a nice 4-inch sleeve, and I think that's what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this 58.5 and then 58.5 by 8.5. So I'll do that off camera, and then I'll show you what it looks like. I have my piece for my sleeve. I cut it at 59.5 or 58.5, something like that, and then and it's 8.5 inches wide. Okay, I've already, for each side, I've pressed under a 1/4 inch and stitched it down so that when you on the edge of the sleeve there won't be any raw edges. Okay, my next step is going to be to stitch this into a tube. I'm going to place it right sides together and then sew a 1/4 inch along this side. I'll do that off camera and I'll show you what's next after that. I've gone ahead and pressed my sleeve. I turned it inside out and I went ahead and pressed it down. So for the first press, I have put the seam in the middle of the back of the sleeve so that it won't tear once the quilt is hanging. And I've pressed it just flat, but I'm going to make one more press. So let me show you that. And this is to help the quilt lay nicely once it's on a rod. So I have it pressed flat here. You can see that now. And I'm going to make one more press. This is the back of the sleeve. So I'm going to turn it over. And then I'm going to fold up about another 1/2 inch on one side. And so what I'm marking now is where I'm going to be doing some hand stitching. So the top line, the top fold, that's where I'm going to put my first row of stitching, and then I'm going to put another row of stitching here where I'm pressing right now. And so I'm pressing about a 1/2 inch, and what I've heard, I've never actually done this, but in the videos that I've watched, when they hang a quilt, this is to help it help the quilt lay flat on the rod instead of folding over the edge. And so I'm just going to go along this whole the whole fold, pressing up about a 1/4 inch beyond the first fold. So I'll do that, and then we'll get ready to pin the sleeve to the quilt. All right, I have the sleeve and I'm pinning it, or getting ready to pin it onto the back of the quilt. I have some concerns because of the way it's made. It's not completely flat, so I'm just getting it as flat as I can before I pin. And I have sort of eyeballed the center of this, and I'm trying to get it, it looks like I'm trying to get it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches below the bottom points on these ruffles, just so it has as much of a chance to stay upright once it's on the wall. I'm not really sure what it's going to do once it's on the wall, but that I don't know that I can do much more about that. So actually I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. I'm just concerned, I don't want it to flop over once it's on the wall, but I don't want to put anything on these ridges. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin, and for now I'll pin the top half or the top fold down and get that ready for stitching, and then I think second I'll go through and do that bottom fold. But I haven't decided if I'm going to pin that yet, or if I'm just gonna go for it as it is. So let me pin the top first, and my goal is to pin through all layers of the quilt, even though I will not stitch through all the layers. And again, there's no batting here. It's just a backing and the top of the quilt, and I just want to get it as stable as I can, or as flat as I can, so that when I'm stitching, I have it as straight as it can be. So I'm just pinning, and I'm going to put a lot of pins. I usually do not pin a lot, but because of the way this is made, I just want to make sure that I pin it thoroughly. And for my stitching it down, I'm not going to use the machine. I'm going to hand stitch this down. I'm going to use the blind stitch. I'll show you that. I'm not sure if that's the best stitch for this, but I know I'm not going to whip stitch it. I think using the blind stitch, it'll hold. It'd be very sturdy, and that's what we want. So I'm just going to pin the rest of this, and then I'll come back and show you the blind stitch, and we'll stitch the top of this down. I went ahead and pinned both sides of the sleeve. You can see the top here is pinned at that fold, and then the bottom, this is the halfway fold, and then this is the extra fold that I created. And so I went ahead and pinned both of those. You can see that this little extra bit of fabric, and that's important to help the quilt hang properly once it's up on the wall. Now I'm going to prepare to stitch this. I have some thread. I have 2 strands of thread that I've knotted in my needle, and the rest of this process is actually going to be finished by hand with the blind stitch. Now I am actually this is actually going to be upside down for you guys, because I am left-handed, and you're going to see me moving from the right to the left. If you're right-handed, this is the way that you would stitch it, from right to left, but I'm actually going from left to right. So I'm going to take my needle and my 2 strands, and just because the bottom fold, I'm facing, I'm just facing it, and it's going the natural direction that I want to go. That's the side I'm going to start with. Since both of them are pinned, I don't think it matters. So I'm just going to take this, and I'm only going to stitch into the back layer of fabric. I'm not stitching through the top at all, and I'm just checking that. And I'm coming up through the back of the sleeve here. Let me just make sure that I don't have the top of it. Oh, I do have the top of it. Let me move it. Mute the TV. Mute. Okay. And then, let's see, just coming up through the back. And then now I'm going to come up through my, my sleeve here. Okay. And then just pull that through. And I pulled the knot through as well, but that hole is gonna disappear soon. Now I'm gonna take I'm just holding my my piece with my hand. I think I'm gonna give this another stitch in the same spot, because I'm not sure how well this the fabric is. It's pretty worn on the back, and so I'm just giving it one more stitch to secure it. Okay. And now to start my blind stitch, from this point I'm going to be working in between the 2 layers of my sleeve. So I'm just going to bring my needle in between those 2 layers. Okay. And then out through that layer. Okay. And then pulling it through like this. Okay. And now I'm going to go back into my backing fabric and then make that same stitch. So backing fabric, and then in between the 2 layers. The hanging sleeve is finished now. Hopefully you can see it on the back of this coverlet. There's about maybe 2 inches on each side. So what I'm hoping is that the quilt will be able to stand well enough. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I hope it doesn't fold down on itself when it's hanging. But I'm happy with the way it turned out. It's not a hard process, but since it's all by hand, I just made sure that I had something nice to watch or to listen to while I worked on it. Another thing that I did was there was a little bit of this was torn, and so I went ahead and I did the same blind stitch here just to finish that off, and then you can see the rest of it. I guess it's whip stitched. I don't even know the name of that stitch, but this is the little part that I finished off on the quilt. So I am pleased with the way it turned out. I'm happy to have it off of my to-do list. If you have any questions about what you've seen in this video, leave them in the comments below. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye!